Is Luis Rosales, a political strategist based in Argentina and author of the new book, Francis, A Pope for Our Time. Luis, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, John. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Okay, so give us the latest update on the situation currently in Venezuela.
Okay, it's still complicated there because President Maduro is still pursuing his objective of militarizing the government, the state. And we believe, many people from abroad Venezuela believe that they are practically following a kind of Cuban script. You know, when you talk with people very familiarized what good happened in Cuba, or what did happen in Cuba several years ago, they consider that Venezuela now is following exactly the same manual, the same script, chapter by chapter. So the prospect for the Venezuela situation is really not good, and it can be becoming worse in the following weeks if President Maduro don't step back and calm a little the situation. He has the power to do it. He is the president. He can put a little more calm and quiet in the society in general, you know.
Yeah, well, talk to us real quickly, Mr. Rosales, about the opposition leader Leopoldo Lopez, a man who seems committed to democracy. What's your take on Lopez? I think you worked with him closely. Does he have the consensus and the I guess, enough people behind him where he could step into place should the Maduro government not be there in the near future?
Yeah, I think that what happened in Venezuela was that after the election process, after the death of President Chavez, an election which was very discussed in terms of the legitimacy of the Maduro term, of the Maduro mandate, of President Maduro's mandate, there was a kind of two positions, very different position. There were a very different position between the two main leaders of the Venezuela opposition. On the one hand, former presidential candidate Enrique Capriles believed that with dialogue and a little more calm procedures, they were able to convince the government to calm down and go back to a more democratic atmosphere and convivence. And on the other hand, there were leaders like Leopoldo Lopez who believed that they were witnessing a kind of radicalization of the regime, and what they really needed was to take more active action against the government. So that's the reason why Leopoldo Lopez moved away and put his personal risk, his persona in front of the demonstration of the people in Venezuela. So I think that those two positions are what we have now in Venezuela. You know, one moderate or a moderate one and a little more radicalized.
So we saw with Lopez at one point he was facing charges for murder. Those charges apparently have been dropped here. But does this tell us that there are limits to how far Maduro will take things, and that he understands that there are limits, that if he were to move forward with those murder charges, that there would be even further turmoil in the country, and that would imperil his own presidency?
Yeah, it's a paradox because the reality is that the murders were committed by the governmental forces, and they are guilting Leopoldo's just to be in front of the demonstrations in which the demonstrators were killed, no governmental officers or military troops. So it's a kind of clear violation of the human rights, of the fundamental human rights. Practically the whole international community are condemning that. So I think what is happening right now in Venezuela is that the Maduro regime has revealed to the rest of the world his real face. You know, he used to have a kind of democratic mask. Now this mask is move on, and his real face is now in front of the whole population.
All right. Well, we're going to bring in David Patton, Newsmax senior editor now. And David, we saw this coup that was briefly attempted back in 2002. We're interested to see if there's any correlation here. I think you had a question for Mr. Rosales.
Absolutely. Mr. Rosales, you mentioned earlier that it appears that Venezuela is running the Cuban playbook in this crisis, but there are some who believe that, in fact, it is running the Castro playbook. That is to say that the Castros are calling the shots in Venezuela. Do you believe that that's the case? Is Maduro basically functioning as a puppet at this point?
In some sense, yes. He's a convinced Marxist, and it's not a the witch hunting that I'm doing, because he, in several occasions, he confessed himself as Marxist, as a convinced Marxist. He was trained in Cuba, and as soon as he assumed his mandate as president, he spent almost a week in Cuba, which was almost impossible to understand. For instance, an Argentinian president to be elected president and then spend a couple of 3 days in the capital of Brazil doing what? At the very beginning or before becoming president. You understand? When they choose president until the ceremony in which became president, these 3 or 4 days he spent in Cuba doing what? So what we believe is that now there is a case, a very strange case, in which the colonial power is smaller and less powerful in terms of resources than the colony, which wasn't the case in the past with European countries or other cases in the world. So it's a strange case of a tiny island which is in position to control a huge and powerful, in terms of natural resources, country like Venezuela.
It's certainly a tenuous situation, to say the least, and one of importance, because, as we heard Luis talk about, and as we've talked about many times, David, what happens in Venezuela has a direct impact on what happens with Cuba and also in other countries in South America, like Argentina and Brazil as well. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Rosales. You can get a copy of his book, Francis, a Pope for Our Time, on Amazon.com. A great book as well.